All right, everybody. This is Gain, Generative AI News. And today is, I believe it's March 16th. We had Pi Day a couple days ago. A lot of crazy stuff was happening. I'm very excited about this week. The news just keeps on coming. Hey, everybody. I'm Bret, Kinsella, host of the Gain Show. I'm also the founder of Voicebot.ai and Synthedia, and that's probably why you're here, one of those reasons. But you might also be here to hear what my colleague Eric Schwartz has to say about some of these topics. Hey, Eric.
Hey, yeah, lots to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we were going to lead off with GPT-4, and we're going to talk about that for sure quite a lot. But Microsoft did a pretty big announcement, showed some very cool demos, and we have a little bit of a breakdown, hot take for you. So I think we're going to start with that, and then we're going to get to GPT-4 because obviously Microsoft's built on that. And we've got a whole lot of other things to talk about. Google trying to get into the game again, mostly from a PR standpoint and announcements that you can't use. We've got Quora, we've got Anthropic, we've got a little bit of South Park for you. So a lot to cover today, and we want to try to do this in about 30, 35 minutes. So let's get started. Eric Schwartz, what just happened with Microsoft?
Microsoft just went all out. They've been slowly until now building up their generative AI tools, putting them into more and more of their services for enterprise and consumer use. And now they just put it all out there, creating a what they're calling Co-Pilot, which is the same name as their GitHub coding assistant, but Co-Pilot for Microsoft 365. So that means everything from Microsoft Docs to Excel to PowerPoint and Teams and everything else. It's giving generative AI power to all of those widely used services and products. So it's now whatever you're using that has a Microsoft logo attached basically will have generative AI somewhere in it.
Yes. Okay. So this is pretty fascinating to me. So we've got Microsoft Word, we've got PowerPoint, we have Outlook for email, Excel. Those demonstrations for Excel sort of blew me away. Okay, so just give people a sense, and we'll put links in here afterwards. But they showed a large, workbook. So workbook has multiple worksheets. There's a lot of data in there, and there's this little chat console where you can ask questions about the data and would answer it. And that's pretty impressive, obviously, because working through some of these workbooks, it's hard to find the data. I don't know how well you have to label everything to make this work, but let's figure that out as we go along. But then it actually did this other thing where you needed to conduct a scenario analysis at some point. And so they typed that in. It created a new worksheet, pulled data from a bunch of different sheets, and then you could actually do some additional manipulation. That was a little further than I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, that was impressive. The whole business chat idea where it will pull the Co-Pilot will pull information from not just what you're working on at that moment, but your connected emails and calendars and databases, and create entirely new products from scratch, essentially.
Okay, so Copilot for Work, pretty interesting. They also have integrations with third parties, particularly sales. They actually talked a lot about the sales process. A couple things that they were looking at. One is, I think you might have to run this in Teams right now, but maybe they'll support some other third-party video conferencing. But the business chat or whatever the Copilot for Teams will do is they'll listen to what's going on. It'll actually take notes. So that's not entirely new. We've seen that before, but it's going to take notes for you, right in the application. When certain topics come up, it was actually making proactive suggestions about things. And at the end, it was doing actually a summary of the meeting plus action items, these things that we would like to have, and an easy way to share this with a set of subscribers. So for example, your boss or other people on your team who weren't able to attend, they would have access to it immediately. I thought that was pretty interesting. I mean, this is the type of business assistant that I think a lot of us have been looking for. And I'd say the voice assistants we have so far haven't lived up to that.
Yeah, it's honestly, I find what's impressive to me is not only that it can answer your questions, but it will also tell you the questions that didn't get answered. It'll mention, you can ask about what's remains to be done. It'll talk about pros and cons of different choices, and even give ideas about what to do next. it goes beyond being the sort of recording secretary, taking notes, summarizing it, and moves it more into having like the kind of fictional, idealized personal assistant who anticipates everything you need for
Right.
you and asks them to help.
Right. And even better, there was this big angle on sales, using this for sales. Like it automatically created a proposal, like based on your notes, and did a proposal. And then it transformed that proposal into your style. And then you needed a presentation to talk about the proposal with your customer. Oh, you just say, take that proposal, turn it into a PowerPoint, add animation. So all these really cool things. But the thing we were just talking about, those notes, it'll send it to your CRM. And if anybody's worked with sales teams before, one of the hardest things to do is to get the data from the meetings and from their conversations into the CRM. And it was automatically sending that, obviously, to Microsoft. I think it's Dynamics, their CRM. They've got this Viva Sales thing that they're working with as well. But it also is supporting Salesforce. So I have a sense that this is going to be very popular.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of pulling from every direction again. Like they talk about how you could have it write a planning overview in a style that matches a previous planning overview, but also includes a timeline from a different file and has a list from someone else. It's just all in one, and theoretically at least organized in a way that matches what you would create in normally hours or days.
So let's talk about how this works. So what they said is Microsoft Copilot is a system. We're going to talk about Google in a minute, and we haven't really heard the story of a system from Google, and so this might indicate that maybe they're even further behind than people think. But Microsoft's obviously been working on this for a long time, and what they have in the center is basically this processing system, what they call the Microsoft 365 Co-Pilot. And they're tying together three sets of technology. So the applications in the upper left, the Microsoft Graph, which is what they know about you, your data, your structured and unstructured data, the way you've used it in the past, might be your company policies. All those things will be in the graph. And then you have the large language model. And I broke this out so that we could think about, or we could look at how the system actually works. So the first thing that happens is you use natural language, and that's your prompt. Like, people understand how that already works. It goes through pre-processing through the system, which sends the prompt to the Microsoft Graph and conducts the process that they call grounding. So I guess they're grounding it in the context that's important to you. And what this is going to do is create what they call a modified prompt. So the modified prompt is something a lot of people are probably come across. If you haven't, you should know this. A lot of these systems, what they're doing is when you put in your natural language prompt, they're adding something to it because they know what your task is, or they've tuned the model and they're actually appending information to your prompt. So that's the modified prompt. In this case, Microsoft is using things that it might know about the application you're working in, but also the information that it has about you and the data that you're using in their system. So that is what then goes to the LLM. So it's your initial prompt plus all this other additional data. You can think of it as metadata, which helps with the instructions. And only then does the LLM respond. So then it comes back to the processing, but it doesn't actually go back to you yet. It goes through post-processing. So again, they're going back to your data. Does this comply with policy? Is this in the style of the user? So that's where they do the grounding again. And then finally, the response comes back to you. And it's not necessarily just a response. So the response might be generative text output, as we would expect, but there could also be these application commands. So we just talked about this idea of transform these notes into a presentation. So then it needs to know, pull the data from this document, this Word document, then give that information to PowerPoint, break it into 7 slides, add pictures here and there, and that type of thing. So this is a pretty interesting approach, and it's, clearly this isn't something that they just put together in the last 4 months.
No, I mean, the collaboration with OpenAI goes back a few years now, and it's clearly been in the works for a while. I mean, the combining what OpenAI had already created in generative AI with Azure starting a couple years ago now, it's all been building to this, and with all the appropriate caveats about accuracy and actual usefulness for the average person. It's something that seems like it will be very valuable. And I think, and notably, what it does is it also it opens up people to a lot of these features that they probably don't know about in the existing product, just because you have to dig in and like spend a lot of time learning how to do all this stuff. But if you can just ask it to do something, well, not only will it handle it for you, but it will also offer to show you how to do it so that you can play around with it and fine tune it. I just think it's a way also for Microsoft to get people to better to engage deeper with their products and therefore obviously use them more.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is all based on
our new friend GPT-4.
Exactly. And so this is the good transition point. Let's talk about GPT-4. I think that's what most people are going to want to hear about right now. It's just like that Microsoft thing is actually a big step up, and it's brand new. It just happened in the last hour that they put this out. Mm-hmm. We'll have stories in Voicebot and Synthedia coming out shortly on those topics. All right. So GPT-4, if we think about it, I mean, we have a little TLDR here. Basically, it's available through ChatGPT Plus at the moment, so it's like a new drop down. It is available through APIs. It outperforms 3.5 significantly. It also, we did a quick evaluation of it, and it's not just them telling you that it's better, but like, we agree that it's actually better. And it is somewhat similar to Bing, but Bing's actually, the new Bing is based on GPT-4, which was also revealed earlier this week. But there's different instruction sets. So the modified prompt, that we talk about, or the appending to the prompt, is a little bit different. A couple other things I thought were really interesting about this. One is, they had some data that showed it outperforming Anthropic's Claude model. And they showed it outperforming also 3.5 and a number of different tests that they had. But they also did not tell us how many parameters are in the model. And we saw this last week with AI 21. All of a sudden, people aren't telling you the number of parameters. Is this collusion? Are they just trying to keep that information from us, Eric?
I think it's because it's either that it's not much bigger or it's the same, in which case they're trying to avoid people just saying, oh, it's just the same thing but better refined, or it's a lot more, and then people can point out, well, then it's just, you're just throwing data at a system that's not really improved. So I mean, those are the only reasons I can think of to hide it. Otherwise, it's just an interesting factoid, unless it's some sort of intellectual property thing, which I wouldn't know why that would matter either. But it's regardless of how many parameters it is, it's a lot of utility and a lot of new power given to it, especially and a lot of hints at upcoming or slowly rolling out features that are going to take advantage of that new power.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that was made clear, I think, by Sam Altman in a couple of his interviews last month, or maybe it was in January, that they might not roll out all the features initially. So multimodal is a little light. We'll talk about that in a moment. But Alan Furstenberg is watching live on LinkedIn, and he said lack of disclosure along these lines of not saying how many parameters is a big deal. And not necessarily the parameters he's saying, but also lack of information about the training sources. And I think the training sources are two aspects. So one of the things people don't know about, beyond parameters, it's also very important how many tokens of data were used in training. And so you actually find some of the smaller models were trained on more tokens. And that's one of the reasons some of the smaller models outperform the larger models, just because they've actually seen more data. And if we look at GPT-3, it was sort of modest in terms of the number of data tokens. It was still a lot, billions. It's a couple times larger than the number of parameters, but it was actually smaller than some of the other models. And so that was really important. But I think this other point that Alan brings up about the training sources, like, is it the same set of data that they trained 3.5 on? Is it different? What's different?
Yeah, I think that does matter. And I think I mean, my impression is there's more or a broader variety, and I'm sure they've been furiously using building up databases based on how people have been using GPT-3, GPT 3.5. But it's an odd thing that as it becomes more widely used and more powerful, it's also becoming a little vaguer about how it's made.
And as a marketer, I understand this. What they want to do is they want to focus people on what it can do. as opposed, the outputs, the benefits, as opposed to the inputs and the sausage making process. But in the space, people are pretty interested in that. And by the way, they set the table early on by focusing on the inputs as opposed to the outputs. And so there's this expectation level around it. Now, just a couple quick things, because we do have other topics to get to, but we want to talk about this a little bit more. So if you look at this chart right here, and you can just look at this in the Synthedia article from this week, but there are, these are different tests that GPT-3, or GPT 3.5, GPT-4 no vision, and GPT-4 with vision have taken. And what you can see is like AP environmental science, GPT-4 is no better. So for some reason, the training data was amazing, and the performance was amazing on GPT 3.5. But as you start going down, maybe art history is no better as well. But you get over to things like AP calculus, much better. Better reasoning is one of the things that they said about this, and so that's going to be very important into that. And then you have like the LSAT, the bar exam, some of those things. So there is a lot of data that they actually released as well in terms of what they say their internal tests have done. Now, we haven't seen that up on sort of the major testing sites on the web and things like that, but maybe we will before too long. Now, the other thing is we have this thing that we talked about in terms of GPT-4 no vision, GPT-4 with vision. And we heard a lot about the idea that this was going to be multimodal. And we think about what is multimodal. So in addition to text, we have audio, video. And in fact, the Microsoft Germany CTO said last week, oh, there will be video. I guess just not this week. It's coming. But the vision piece, it's very lightly rolled out. It's like there's not a lot of places you can use it. But there is this really cool app that they have. Is it called My Eyes?
Yeah, Be My Eyes.
What's that? Oh, Be My Eyes. Yeah, exactly. And it's not just looking at something like Google Lens and telling you what it is. It's actually observing an environment and giving you all this amazing context. And right now, it looks like Be My Eyes is like is an app. It's a third-party app. It's not OpenAI. It's available for the blind. So they're serving that community first. And then there's a waiting list of millions who are not blind who would like to have access to it as well.
Yeah. It was a wonderful concept even before generative AI, the idea of volunteers helping those with low vision or no sight to understand what's their environment and what's around them and everything. But the idea of applying generative AI to it it's both very obvious and very obviously not just going to be useful for people with disabilities. It's such a helpful tool. I mean, the ways that it was being used for Be My Eyes, just the fashion aspect alone about using generative AI to describe clothing and what people are wearing seems like it could have so many uses in a lot of contexts. Training for all kinds of purposes of business and otherwise. I mean, yeah. And spotting things that you might miss, for instance. I mean, I try to be observant, but there are definitely people who can spot issues better than I can.
Absolutely.
Just think about something that you could say, "How do I look?" to an AI, and it could say, "Oh, you look great, but your fly's down."
Oh yeah. Well, wait a second. We already had a product like that. It was called the Echo Look, and that's
it wasn't. That one was more just to make sure that you could find the same clothing on Amazon. I think.
Yeah. Well, yes, there was a shopping aspect to that. Alan brought up an interesting point too, and this relates to this idea of why the no vision and the vision might be different in the performance. Some of those tests that it was taking have charts, have graphs, have images, and so the vision component is going to help the GPT-4 answer some of those questions better, where that's like a relevant part of it. But Alan really talked up at this fact is like, should we even care? Since we don't know what it's trained on, they could have just trained on a lot of that content so they would look better in those tests, or they could look better. And even the tests like the one against Anthropic, and there's a couple others that they show up there. Those are known tests. And so you can game the system. If people are going to judge your quality based on those, then ultimately train on those and it doesn't mean there won't be huge gaps elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible, and I wouldn't be shocked if that was part of the testing. But it's also one of the it would become very obvious very quickly as soon as people started using it for anything else, and it immediately fell apart. So unless that's something they're not worried about, that feels like um, a problem they would hope to avoid, hopefully want to avoid
Yeah.
by preparing for it.
Okay, so we're going to continue talking about GPT-4 a little bit because it's involved in so many of these stories. But what I did want to bring up is this other thing. So Google, interestingly, made an announcement again this week too. So Google very famously talked about Bard and demonstrated that the day before the new Bing was released, and that demonstration didn't go that well. Wasn't that well received? Um, and in comparison to to what we saw with Bing, it seemed fairly lackluster as well, just in terms of its feature performance. But Google wanted to front run what it knew was happening that week. It got word that Microsoft was going to make an announcement. They made their own announcement, and so when everyone wrote about the bigger news, which is what Microsoft was doing, then all of a sudden they were like, "Oh, and Google has something too." So Google, and they did that again this week. So they knew this future of work thing was coming out with Copilot 365. And so they said, oh, we're going to add this to not G Suite, but a couple of the applications in G Suite. Wouldn't that be great? Why don't you tell people about this, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, it feels weird, but it feels like tactics that I think of applying to entertainment, like movies and music, where the studios will rush out a movie that is on the same topic as another studio's movie. Think about when there was 2 meteor impact movies, 2 volcano movies, things like that. They'll trip all over each other trying to be first because sometimes that's the most important thing. And it feels like a little bit like that's what Google is doing here, because they have a partial generative AI integration with some of their products, but not all of them. So in this case, at the moment, just Google Docs and Gmail have new generative AI tools that, again, much like what Microsoft is doing, it's tools for helping write, helping brainstorm, editing, lengthening and shortening text. It's same thing for Gmail, and it's definitely potentially very helpful, very useful, but it feels a little premature, and you can tell that because they when they announced these tools, they said, oh, and also it'll be coming to the other Google's suite of products. So yeah,
I have to say, it's like, Alan said there, Google tries to get ahead of the news and trips over its own shoelaces. I mean, that seems, there's 2 things here. So and Mikkel just said this, like announce and not deliver. This is the other thing. Oh yeah, we have this thing coming. We've been hearing about Lambda for 2 years. And I think we're going to see Bard coming up. But we've been hearing about it for a while, but you little people can't use this yet. Maybe we'll let a few people in Test Kitchen use part of it, but we'll give it to you because we control the magic. We have all the magic. And the thing about what Google announced this week with Docs and Gmail, it's like, this is actually what I expected Microsoft to roll out. I expected them to say, hey, we have these applications. Now we have a new feature in these applications. So it's really like it's just discrete, additional sort of siloed solutions. And that would have been beneficial just itself, right? Having these things integrated. But then they came out with this system, say, oh, no, you can use all these things together. And it just looks that much more impressive. And maybe in this case, it looks like Google is, as we said at the top, maybe further behind than maybe we even thought. Even though we thought they were behind, they could catch up. But if someone's actually building this integrated system and you haven't even started yet, you've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it's telling that the most distinctive feature of these generative AI tools is that, along with lengthening and shortening and so on, there's an I'm feeling lucky button, which essentially unleashes the creative elements of generative AI. So essentially changing the sliders to make it more to give it more variety. But that's honestly the only thing that stands out as being like distinct or in any way potentially going to attract someone using generative AI with Google Docs versus Microsoft Word.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Alan just said, yeah, they did deliver something. Like some of these tools have been in there, features for a lot of different things. They just didn't tell anybody about it, and they're just less impressive than what we're seeing now. I think is like my summary there. But
Yeah.
but OpenAI, Microsoft, and Google weren't the only people who made an announcement this week. We have the new kid on the block, Anthropic, which is also partially owned by Google. They brought out Claude, sort of, kind of this. They pulled the Microsoft on us. Yes, it's available, but you can't use it. Or if you know us and you're like the VCs who invested in us, then you can use it.
Yeah, Anthropic. It's the quote unquote renegade OpenAI developers who ran off to do their own thing, and
the renegades who are making the safer chatbot, because OpenAI doesn't the guardrails aren't good enough.
Yeah, and again, speaking of timing, it's like everything happened on a couple of days ago. It's GPT-4 and also Anthropic and also Google, and then it's and I made the joke about how it's like they picked Pi Day because it seems irrational to have it all happen on the same day. But the Anthropic thing, what is genuinely interesting about their approach is that they're trying very hard to co-opt what people like about what OpenAI has done, and also get ahead on things it hasn't reached yet, or has had complaints about, things about reliability. Trying to hallucinate answers less often than ChatGPT has, and also more capacity for steering the conversation so that you don't necessarily go off the rails like the New York Times reporter did.
Well, the constitutional AI is really they sell it as the big differentiator. So we have reinforcement learning with human feedback, which is really the key part of the program that has made OpenAI so successful with GPT-3 and 4. Constitutional AI doesn't rely exclusively on humans. It actually has this learning algorithm that's trying to make it better over time. And it's not so much like factuality, although that is like one part of it. It's also about this idea of safety, trust and safety, making that better. And it is more scalable for sure. And, to the certain extent, there's still bias in terms of the way that the constitutional AI is initially programmed, and then how it works on different types of content. But it does in some ways remove some of the bias that OpenAI talked about a few weeks ago about like, oh yeah, maybe our models are a little biased because the humans in the loop who are giving the reinforcement learning feedback may have not followed our guidelines all the time.
Yeah. Well, and we can talk about it, but you can tell based on who some of their early partners are, what they value in terms of, as you're saying, avoiding the pitfalls of hallucinations or of going off the rails. It's and again, it makes sense that Google would invest in them, since one of the reasons that people speculate Google has been slower in some ways than OpenAI or Microsoft is because they're more concerned about avoiding whether it's just bad press or problems with their corporate clients having sending bad emails out based on their generative AI tools.
Yes. Okay. All right. So that's Anthropic. I think more to come on Anthropic because Claude is still in limited release, like most of these things. But we had another announcement on Pi Day. Quora unveils the generative AI chatbot Poe, but they've already really talked about this, so it's been out there, but they gave us more information and like slightly larger distribution in terms of access.
Yeah, it makes sense that somebody would be doing it, and might as well be Quora. But it's the idea that there are all these generative AI chatbots out there. Sometimes they're good for specific tasks or specific projects, and you want to make sure that you can quickly get to the ones that you want, and you maybe want to use more than one. And so that's basically what Quora has done. You can see on that list there, it's ChatGPT as well as GPT-4. It's Claude and the new Claude Plus. It's also Sage and Dragonfly, which are not generating quite as much heat, but are basically the same concept of generative AI chatbot. And now you can subscribe and pay to sign up, which it's not cheap. It's like $30 a month, or sorry, $20 a month, or $200 a year, and that way you can. But it's a way to access these new models in a way that otherwise is more difficult. So you can get to GPT-4 without signing up for ChatGPT Plus, and you can get to Claude Plus without having to go through Anthropic directly. It's I think those kinds of services are going to be very appealing to people who don't necessarily know what AI they want to use. They want to experiment around.
Yeah, like it's good to have a sandbox where they're all in the same place. So I think that's pretty cool. And as a Q&A site, maybe it's smart of them. So like whatever you prefer, you can do that. Plus you get to try them out here, and maybe Quora is relevant again, because, Quora, if we think about in the text generation space, we've got the stock photo sites, which the AI image generators are an existential crisis for these companies.
Yep.
For Quora, isn't ChatGPT and Bard and all these things, aren't they an existential crisis for Quora?
I mean, you would think so, but I guess it depends on what they think their users want. I mean, if people are still going to use Quora regardless, then it doesn't matter as much. And if they can use their database to supplement the AI answers, then that's certainly helpful. But I think it matters most when it comes to the really it's either right or wrong. There's some websites that have that focus specifically on coding that have barred ChatGPT answers because there's just too often wrong.
Sure. Stack Overflow, like being the primary example. But I think in this case too, I think it's really interesting. So Quora is about real people, like real experts answering the question. If you've used Quora, you realize that that's actually not most of it. Occasionally you'll find someone who's an insider who has specific knowledge you can't find elsewhere, which is amazing, because they used to work at a company and they'll answer something that like probably shouldn't be out there. There are some actual experts, and then there's a lot of people posing as experts, mostly just regurgitating things. It's become a content marketing platform, particularly for people who like to position themselves as influencers. So it's kind of interesting that like maybe these LLMs will increase the quality of the responses on Quora and make it relevant again. We'll see. But I just don't think anyone's going to go to Quora anymore. I think they're going to use Bing. I think they're going to use ChatGPT. They're going to use a bunch of these other solutions, maybe Claude. I don't know if that'll take off, but it's just hard for me to believe that Quora is going to be as relevant a year from now as it maybe was 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with how some of the voice assistants have tried to create their own sort of Quora's, Alexa answers and so on. But ultimately, if people can get whatever people can get the quickest answer and usually trusted, that's what they're going to use.
Absolutely. Okay, last story for today, because we like to try to keep these things relatively brief so that you guys get a quick update on what's going on. If you want more data, by the way, definitely go to Synthedia, go to Voicebot. There's some other places where we provide links actually to the sources, like the Microsoft blog and those types of things, the OpenAI announcement information. So you can look at our perspective on it. You can look at the source material. But I think we talked about this in one of the shows before Gain, actually, before we started doing this weekly one. But back in it might have been our synthetic media piece at the end of the year up for the podcast. But it's like, of course, this is going to show up in Saturday Night Live, and it's going to show up in South Park in the first quarter of this year. And look what happens. ChatGPT shows up in South Park. Chaos ensues. What else would you expect?
And not just shows up, but helps write the episode.
That's true. In the credits, Trey Parker and ChatGPT are the authors. Matt Stone, surprisingly not one of the authors this week.
It was honestly, like, for all that South Park can be sometimes hit or miss in its satire, this was very much a solid hit, mocking both how useful generative AI is, how not creative it can sometimes be, and honestly pointing out that people are not necessarily the most creative. The people who are worried about the end of human creativity, not everyone is creative in everything they do all the time, so it's okay. But yeah, the fact that it is used, and then that that ChatGPT helps write essentially a very cliche episode of South Park is pretty funny.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought it was funny. I think there's like a couple things to take away from it. So first of all, I'd love to show you the clip, but YouTube would take down this whole video like immediately. South Park's really Comedy Central is very aggressive about that. So I recommend you go look at it. We'll put a link so that you guys can look at it. I think it's or if you just go to Synthedia, actually, we've got 3 clips in there, which are probably a third of the entire show. The
I would
humor's really
say
good.
the only unrealistic element is that they have a detector for AI written text that is much more accurate than the real thing is right now.
Oh, yeah, the shaman. Yeah, well, I won't ruin it for people, but like you guys can check that out. It's like the anti-technology figures out where the technology is being used. So I think the bigger takeaway here for me though is when new technologies are on a trend towards adoption, a few things happen. One is you start seeing consumers use it a lot. And we saw the 100 million people who monthly active users on ChatGPT. I'm not sure it's that high anymore. I'll be interested to see what those numbers look like when we start to see them. But still, a lot of people were aware of it very quickly. That's a large number of people over just about 6 to 8 weeks. We look at the demand side who might be using this technology, integrating it into their applications. Clearly, that's happening all over the place. It's not as clear that their users are applying this in any meaningful way yet, but it will be happening. It seems pretty strong. But the other thing that's very clear is when we start seeing these technologies show up in popular culture. And that means that there's a couple of things happening. So first of all, there's enough awareness out there about this that some people will get the joke just immediately. I think that's really important about it. And I think beyond that, it's just this idea that they're spreading awareness and they're creating a new way to think about it. They're summarizing for the people who haven't seen it. They're giving a little summary about what it is, and then they're putting in these funny situations. And it's very different from the doom and gloom that we hear from some of the folks saying, "Oh, it's unsafe and it's going to take jobs." And it's like just putting this saying, "Oh yeah, it's kind of funny." All of a sudden, are they elementary school boys are using it to generate more compassionate, empathetic texts for their girlfriends.
Yeah, there's like stages of pop culture adoption of technology, and South Park, they still had to explain what ChatGPT is. It couldn't just be mentioned without explaining it, but within the context of the story. But they're usually pretty fast on these things, but it won't be long before people will make a ChatGPT or related reference without explaining what it is, and people just will say, "Oh no, he wrote that with ChatGPT," and everyone will laugh without having to explain what happened. And that happened with voice assistants. That happens with all kinds of technology. The only question is whether the pop culture take in the end is that generally good or generally bad, or just not has no value. It's value neutral, I guess.
Yeah. Well, in any event, more awareness from that. Also, one more shout out. In addition to ChatGPT in the credits, there was also a company in the generative synthetic voice or voice cloning space. Play.ht was in there. I reached out to the CEO, and they were the voice of ChatGPT in that. So, really good profile or exposure for Play.ht. Another company. So you think about what South Park's doing. They're not just using ChatGPT in it. They're not just using that as a storyline, but then they're using other synthetic media technologies in order to execute the program. And I think we're just going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, especially from South Park guys who are very interested in synthetic media.
Okay, we ran a little long today. I'm actually going to be doing a session right now, like a post show on AI Circle for anybody who's part of that. I hope you can join us. If not, just search on AI Circle, or maybe Mikkel will put something in the notes here. We're going to talk about this a little bit more live. We'll do like interactive Q&A. But thank you so much for everyone who showed up. Those of you who made comments is really fun. And this is going to be up on YouTube. If you missed the first part of it, you'll be able to see this in like 2 minutes on YouTube. You'll be able to do the replay, or on LinkedIn. All right, folks, until next week. Bye-bye.